Welcome to the Order of Initiative, a D&D podcast where me and my friends talk about Dungeons & Dragons, DMing, and everything to do with running the game. Today, we're talking about villains and how to design an effective one for your Dungeons & Dragons campaign. I'm Charles, and today we've got Nathan.
Hello.
Willis.
Hello.
And I'm still Charles. All right. First thing, let's roll initiative and see who's going to lead the conversation.
Fuck! I left my dice in another room.
Oh my god! I got a nat 1. What the fuck?
I'm looking at a 12 over here.
I cannot believe that every single time there's a nat 1 or nat 20 by someone.
You know, some weeks we got the real good luck, and some weeks we got real bad luck. We can't just...
Okay.
It just won't even out.
Okay. I got a nat 20.
Are you fucking serious?
Yeah.
It evened out.
What the hell is this luck? Alright, Willis, what do you think about villains?
Villains are bad people, and they should feel bad about being bad. No.
Well, see you guys next week.
That's it. We've covered everything.
Yeah, I can't really think of anything to add to that.
I think villains can be... Really, they are as important a character as even some of your player characters, because without, something to go against, the players, they're just kind of, not really doing anything worthy, and villains don't always have to be like a person. They could be, nature or, the system.
The man.
Yes.
Yeah, that it's almost like an antagonist, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think I don't know if it's worth getting into the nitty gritty definitions, but like in general literature, you've got your man versus man, man versus self, man versus nature, right? Those are usually like your breakdowns of your antagonist.
Man versus God, in this case, literally.
Ah, yeah.
Man
Sometimes,
versus
yeah.
no god.
Yeah. There's a lot of them.
Whatever, there's a few.
Do you think there's I think there is, but what do you think the difference is between a villain and just your run-of-the-mill enemy? Like a goblin you fight. Like a goblin opposes the party, sure. Probably briefly. With what? How much health they have? Like 6?
If they're lucky.
So what's the difference between your like regular old goblin and a full-blown villain?
Scale, I think, is the first thing that comes to mind for me. Because, like we were joking about, that the whole 6 HP that goblin has isn't going to be a huge impediment to the party. That's a longsword hit. Whereas, your villain is going to, it's not just going to be a sack of hit points. They're, potentially performing machinations, or maybe they are just a bigger sack of hit points. But I think scale is the first more important thing that would differentiate them from a run-of-the-mill stat block you're throwing at your party.
Mm-hmm. I think I also think about, like, personal stakes. Most enemies you throw at your party can be almost faceless. I don't know if I would always recommend that. But, not every single enemy they fight is going to have a fully fleshed out backstory, especially if you're throwing, like, wild animals at them or straight up monsters. But a villain can have that more like personal touch to it. Like maybe how are they like directly opposing the party? Did they kill an NPC they like? Did they physically wrong the party? Did they betray them? Personal touches make it seem like a more personal story and a more personal enemy.
I would agree to that.
What you got, Willis? What do you think?
Yeah, I think who your villain is like a really big part of it. Like you can have that bad guy king, who's oppressing the kingdom, but if your characters are not part of the kingdom, what's to stop them from going, well, let's just move to the next, country. We don't have a stake.
Yeah. There should definitely be like clear consequences for inaction, I think. I also think about like villains in terms of like tiers, right? So something I like doing is setting up this enemy. Maybe he's like a goblin chieftain, and he's, even that has tiers. So like you're fighting underlings of this chieftain just to get to him, and then after finally defeating him, you find out that he's serving some greater lord, and you can kind of work your way up that ladder and keep moving on to bigger and bigger threats that were all part of the same chain.
Mm-hmm. And I think something that could be interesting that you can do later is you're fighting this goblin chieftain who's he's giving the party a hard time, and then you find out that he's just, he's working for that other guy, and then when you're getting to the other guy, you're all of a sudden fighting like 6 goblin chieftains, and the party is, like crushing them, and it's like, I can't believe we used to have trouble with this guy.
Yeah, that's a cathartic thing. Like what used to be a boss is now just a regular enemy.
It leads to a sense of growth.
Yeah.
So how do you go about making villains would be sort of my next thing. I think that's an important step we gotta look at before we can progress through a series of them. Do you prefer, the unrepentantly evil villains, or do you prefer more nuanced villains that you can agree with?
I think there's a place for your like overtly evil villains. Definitely depending on your tone. If you're not going for a super serious tone, then you can have your like mustache twirling Sunday morning cartoon villain, right? Not a whole lot of depth to them, but certainly fun to play as. Personally, I like doing something a bit more compelling. And answer your question, Nathan, I start from the basis of creating a hero, which I think is incredibly effective. If you want a rounded and fleshed out villain or character in general, walk through their motivations. I think the place a hero and a villain deviates is their methods and how far they're willing to go. So, the players are probably determined to save the world, and your villain, from his or her perspective, probably also thinks they are saving the world, but maybe they're willing to throw a couple 100,000 people on the bonfire to get that end. I always think of Osmondeus from Watchmen, right? Clearly the antagonist / villain of the series, and spoilers for a fucking 40-year-old comic book.
And if you haven't read it by this point, it's your fault anyways. Go read Watchmen.
You should read it. It's phenomenal. So spoilers for the ending. Osmondeus foresaw World War III, and to prevent it, created a seemingly external threat to make humanity come together. But to sell that threat, he basically nuked a city. And, it's such a good ending. He arguably does save the world, but at what cost?
It's definitely
such a interesting thing.
They're definitely like building up there. It's like, USSR and the USA are coming into it for some negotiations, but I think it does a good job of leaving it vague. But this isn't the Watchmen Hour. Sorry.
I'm fine with that. I mean, the more I think about it, I think it's such a good example. Like, the character is literally a hero in terms of like the worldview even before this event, and after it happens, the main characters don't take him down because exposing it would undo the good. So then you just have 2 bad things. Also,
because the one of the guys that agreed with him at that point was an omnipotent god, and the one guy that tried got exploded.
He did get a little exploded. Yeah, I don't know. I always loved Osmondeus as a perfect example of a somewhat, I don't want to say justified villain, but you understand where he's coming from. Yeah. I mean, I think. Sorry, I should let someone else talk, but I have lots of Lots of villains I can think of.
The idea I usually go for when I'm making villains, the one I like, is I look at Star Wars, the
I
original
was
trilogy,
just about to talk about the Emperor.
because I love unrepentantly evil villains, but I think I agree with you that you need a character that's more sympathetic, that has a personal character. You don't. The Emperor is very much that. Yes, I want to take over the galaxy and blow up planets. I'm so evil. But the villain, he doesn't really show up as like an actual villain until the third movie. Up until that point, the face of the Empire is Darth Vader, and he is that character that has, a character and emotions and feelings, and that's the villain that not only the heroes but the audience are interacting with more. So I like having that dark evil force that needs to be overthrown, but the face of my party's obstacles generally will be somebody that they can, if not overtly reason with, at least sympathize with.
Here's a question, and I honestly don't even know what I would say. Which character do you think is more effective as a villain, Vader or the Emperor?
I would say
I don't fucking know.
that's a tough one. If I had to say as a villain, I would. They both serve different purposes. Is the weird thing
Yeah.
I would say Vader just because like I said, he's the face of the Empire for a majority of that trilogy. The Emperor kind of just shows up there at the end for the big climax of it, and to allow Vader the opportunity to renounce his dark side. But Palpatine in the prequel trilogy, that's a different story. I think he wins it in that case.
Mm-hmm. Willis, do you have any thoughts about that? I want to make sure you get a chance to
talk. As far as the villainy of Vader and Palpatine, I don't know. I could probably talk about it for a while, but it's one of those things where it's just like there's so much. It's like,
well, good news. You're on a podcast.
Yeah. Something I was actually kind of thinking that's a little bit of a different direction is it got me thinking with how Palpatine isn't, quite the face of the villainy. How do you guys feel about starting with like no villain? Like the party has a task that they have to complete, and then once they complete this task, then they find out, oh, there's a bad guy and he's doing bad things.
Yeah, I do that. That's actually how I prefer to do it.
Do you mean in terms of your planning or what you presented when you say there's no villain?
Sometimes in one of the recent campaigns, I started out with no villain in mind, and I was starting with kind of like here's a task, and as they were working through this task, I was kind of like formulating who this villain was going to be. Maybe it's going to be an NPC. Maybe I'm going to bring in someone else. Something like that.
I can absolutely see that working. I personally haven't done that. I could see myself doing that. I think just the way I plan campaigns is I try to have an end in mind, and with that comes the big bad guy. So I usually have a pretty good idea of who that's going to be. But I think I might even present it the same way. Spoilers? Maybe? Not really. I mean, Willis, in the campaign you're in, I have an idea of who the big bad guy is, and I feel like you guys don't, but...
I have a similar experience going on in my game if you want to use an example without spoiling it for Willis.
That's about all I was going to say, but yeah, go ahead.
Legacy of Golden leaves people. Turn off the video now, or the podcast. I in my game that I'm running, I've had a villain in mind for actually years. This is the third time I've tried to run this game. But it's sort of the ideas I'm sort of going along is they have interacted with minor villains already, and even PBEGs of smaller arcs. But I know who my high tier villain is at this point, and I've been sprinkling information on them or information relevant to them the entire time I've been playing. He's got a series of MacGuffins or plot coupons or whatever you want to call them, and they've already found one. They don't know what it is, and they don't have it anymore, but they've interacted with it. met servants of this character. They've met characters that utilize the same powers he will. And it's just, over the course of this game, I'm going to introduce more and more of these and allow the party to sort of try and put these puzzle pieces that I've been scattering across the continent together themselves until they eventually get to actually meet the character, which should be hopefully not too much longer, but we'll see what happens. And I think that's a real neat way to do it, because it's sort of the same thing we were talking about earlier. You introduce the lieutenants or the servants of your guy, and you just sort of scale up. And with this guy being the biggest guy in town, I don't want to introduce them to him right away. They don't even know he exists at this point, but they will.
Yeah.
They will soon.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if he's commented on it, but I have a theory about how Matt Mercer designs his campaigns and villains. Just from watching like early campaign 2, I feel like he throws out a bunch of potential plot points or threads, because in early campaign 2, the party found hints about gods of hunger, and people in the party had ties to incredibly powerful entities, and then they found out there was a whole host on that same level this character was tied to. And I think Matt has a very open mind and throws out all these kind of like all this bait, and then sees what the party is most interested in and starts pursuing, and then he fleshes it out. And I don't think he's commented on it, but just watching it seems so clear, because it seems very unstructured, but in a good way. It seems like he's giving him all these different options.
Yeah, I actually kind of noticed that too in campaign 1 specifically, because there were definitely a lot of dark, evil things that are getting dropped in and about, and I don't think all of them got covered. I can't think of all of them at the moment, but there was only the one of Orcus's horns was still unaccounted for at the end of that campaign.
Oh wow!
And whereas like those were a lot of the. I mean, Vecna, the penultimate villain of that game, got his sort of foreshadowing dropped in like in episode 30.
Oh yeah,
real early, and it just didn't come up until it's like, oh shit, wait, hold on a minute, that's for Vecna.
That does seem like a pretty smart way to do it, because like if you have, I mean, kind of like what I'm doing right now, if you have one big villain in mind, and the whole campaign is based around getting to the point of setting them up and introducing them and fighting them, and if the party like isn't interested, like you put a lot of effort into one like plot point, and hopefully it pans out. Compared to giving them the option to pursue what threats they want and then building it up to sort of match their interest. It seems like a smart way to do it. It's something I want to try in the future.
Another way you could do it, and this is the way I'm doing it with my game, is you sort of make, when you give your campaign pitch, even if you don't bring up your villain in that pitch, make sure that your villain is tied to whatever you talked about there. Like when I pitched Legacy of Golden Leaves, once again, friends, players, stop listening. I gave them the pitch about the ancient world wreathed in golden leaves, and how the golden wood was a beautiful forest that got burned down. And the game's called Legacy of Golden Leaves, as they sort of live in the remnants of this world 1,000 years later and the ramifications of what happened there. And so my villain is intimately tied to that event. And when he shows up, I know they're going to be interested in him, because when I pitched this game to them, they were interested in it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, that's definitely seems like a setting where there's less wiggle room, and that's again not necessarily a bad thing, but just like it's so integral to the setting.
Yep.
Do you guys something I think about is in classic literature, or just standard literature, villains usually oppose characters in a very direct way, especially in terms of like their morality or beliefs as a whole. I always think about Batman and the Joker, right? Order and chaos. Is it possible to create a villain that opposes the party from a like philosophical standpoint, when the party a group of misfits and might have totally different views.
So I think it's possible to do that, but to be able to do that, you have to be getting a really strong sort of reading from your players of where they stand in relation to, things like that. Like, are they, help the poor? Are they this and that? And I think a lot of times you have party members that their characters have differing views even. So it can be hard to set up a villain that opposes them as a whole when they are, kind of a little bit scattered, usually.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to your Batman Joker analogy, the way I sort of like to do it is I with my BBEGs, my main villain of the game, I don't really specifically target them to specific ideologies of the party because, like Willis said, there's going to be some variation in how each individual member of the party works. Like, going back to the Batman example, if Joker opposed the Justice League, that's Batman's party, he's not necessarily going to have that same ideological clash with, say, Superman or Wonder Woman. But in its instances where the Joker opposes the Justice League, that is almost always a Batman-centric arc, because that is Batman's foil. So that's sort of the way I would do it, is you can bring in minor villains to clash with the party that are maybe the foil of individual characters. And they're not going to be your overarching villain of your game, but it'll allow you to give 1 or 2 sessions to engage that player and get them involved in your setting in this villain. And then later on, you can bring in Darkseid, who has a much broader scope of his villainy that's not foiling any individual character. But I'm positive every single member of the Justice League is probably not cool with Darkseid conquering or blowing up their planet.
Probably. Yeah, I think about that a lot too. Like, do you think by definition, a villain that threatens the whole party has to be a little blander?
I think it's certainly it's hard to have that like sort of agreeable villain when it's the whole party, because for the party to really hate the guy, you got to be like really heavy-handed with it, or if you want him to kind of sympathize with it, you have to make him sort of really sympathetic. Like, I feel like to be able to encompass the whole party, you have to be really heavy-handed with the villains if you want them to be everybody, which can sometimes make them seem kind of like they're boring or stereotypical or cliche or whatever.
I think at that point you might need to just kind of roll back to what we were saying at the beginning, is just think of them as a character and a hero. So build up their personality before you think about the bigger implications of what they represent. Because I think of characters like Thanos, who obviously was like the culmination of 20 plus movies in the MCU, and I think he's characterized great. He clearly opposes all of these heroes and all these characters, but he isn't bland. You really understand his like philosophy and even his personality. And then on the other hand, you've got fucking, who's the guy from Justice League? Stroganoff? What the hell is he? Stormageddon?
Oh yeah,
Steppenwolf.
Steppenwolf. Yeah.
That's what it is. Who was so just, I couldn't tell you a single line that character said. He was so just, I am evil. Hello. And I think, yeah, you can build up a personality and then they'll be memorable.
Exactly. And I guess I wasn't trying to say with my bit that they need to be bland and generic and I'm trying to blow up the world. But
oh, I know. I was just throwing out my thoughts.
Yeah. But I think it's probably a folly to try and have your BBEG be a foil to any one member of the party, because then everybody else in the party is like, oh, I'm not the main character.
Yeah.
And that's not a good feeling to have if you've been investing a year in the game. It's like, damn, it's not my story.
I almost think you could do that on a smaller scale. So like, the first Avengers film, the main antagonist is Loki, who is clearly from like Thor's backstory. If you're thinking about this in like a D&D party composition, he's from Thor's backstory. I think that's a cool little arc. Everyone's opposing this bad guy from one player's backstory. And the way to do it is like, in an arc or two, have another villain be from another character's backstory.
Exactly.
It's kind of in a weird way, it's that player's time to shine, because their foil appeared. It's something I've also messed around is the idea of like making essentially a league of villains composed entirely of villains from players' backstories. Which
yes, the Masters of Evil.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't quite done it because it almost seems too convenient, especially if the party is thrown together through like coincidence and circumstance. It seems even weirder if all these characters from their backstories were also thrown together through circumstance. So I think a better way to do it maybe is to do characters they've met along the way. So like if they've run into a goblin chieftain who they spared his life, or maybe he got away, he shows up in another couple arcs and he's allied himself with the new threat, which is a vampire lord, and he's missing an eye because the party disfigured him. And if you can like build up a personal league of villains, I think that would be super memorable.
Yeah, you can
all these characters they've wronged.
You can still use characters from the backstory as well too, because presumably they're going to show up at some point, and if the character's foil shows up, let them get away, and then they can go join the Injustice League.
And
yeah, I guess you. Oh, go ahead.
Well,
Willis.
I was gonna say about the characters being from the backstory, and I think you could even have your BBEG be from somebody's backstory, because Thanos and Gamora have their history there, and I think as long as your villain does something to the other players to make them be on the same page, where it's like, oh, this guy is he's just as much I want him down just as much as this character whose backstory he's from, or even like maybe sneak him into the other player's backstory. Maybe their parents were killed in a barn fire, and then the characters they didn't think about it, but maybe all of a sudden that barn fire was set by one of the minions of this guy. Because
it was me, Barry.
I was gonna say the same thing. I was gonna say the exact same thing, Nathan.
Gotcha. I know where you're at.
It was me. Willis, do you know what we're talking about?
It sounds familiar.
It's this fucking meme with the Reverse Flash, who I guess it was in a comic. It's just his infamous panel where he's revealing that everything that ever went wrong in Barry's life was because of the Reverse Flash.
Remember that time you put in that pizza in the microwave and it was there for a minute, you took a bite and it was still cold? It was me, Barry. I was that pizza.
Oh my god.
I think one of my favorite memes on the internet.
It's so good. You're totally right though, Willis. Like, if you can sell the rest of the party on how much of an asshole this is, sure, make one character from someone's backstory be the big villain. Because like, yeah, the other side of that is like, if they just show up and they're just being evil as stated in the other character's backstory, the rest of the party's like, well, okay, I guess we're doing this guy's backstory, and oh, it's the culmination of the whole game. I guess this character was the main player or the main character the whole time. Cool. Not super what you want.
No. And it'd be tricky to weave them in there. And you would definitely have to have like some, foresight and lay the seeds for it. You can't just, plop them in there and you expect everybody to get on board.
As I'm saying this, I'm realizing that I've probably done something unfortunately similar. In the last campaign I ran with you guys, I've mentioned it before, but the big bad guy was an elder god who was the embodiment of hunger, and he tied in very, very closely to another character's backstory. This character thought they were half-elf, eventually was revealed to be an Aasimar. Their father was a full Aasimar and like the last of his kind.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll get into all of it, but obviously that player had more ties to the big bad guy than you guys did. A question for you, Willis, is did that end up working okay? Because obviously I tried to set up this elder god as threatening the world, and he was approaching it, and you guys knew that for a long time.
So I don't know if I can really speak to the other players in there, but it worked fine for me and my character, because you actually did tie it in a little bit to my character, who was a warlock whose patron was the elder god of like knowledge, and then you revealed at some point that elder god of knowledge was actually eaten by the elder god of hunger. So I was like, oh shoot! Oh my god!
I think you were having like communion with it like normal, and then a big fucking like eldritch, colossal, cosmic mouth ate your patron.
Yeah, which was alarming to say the least.
Oh yeah, and then I think it just like stared at you, right?
Yeah, every other time I went and tried to like do anything with my patron, it was just like watching me, and I didn't quite figure it out right away. Was part of it too.
I don't know if I ever like super made it obvious, but part of the implication is that it found Earth because of you.
Oh, oof. No, I definitely did not pick up on that. Oof.
Yeah, it knew where you were.
Oh man.
Something I think about sometimes is like the different kinds of villains you can do in terms of what they're threatening, because you can have like, to go back to comics once again, you can have like a physically threatening villain like Bane, or more of a socially threatening villain like Lex Luthor. Honestly, I mean, obviously sometimes he physically threatens Superman. He makes a fucking mech suit and uses kryptonite, but you know,
other times he gets elected president.
Yeah, and that's what is a bigger fucking like societal threat than your villain being the president?
Yeah,
that's nuts.
It's like, sure, I could just beat the tar out of you, or I could be your boss, and now how are you gonna deal with that?
By the way, Superman is illegal now.
Yeah.
Executive order, bitch.
Do you guys like mixing those two, or like keeping them sort of one and the same? Because like, how would you feel about an arc that sets up Lex Luthor as an untouchable president, and then Superman confronts him, and Lex throws on a suit, and now they're punching each other? That almost, to me, it almost seems like an undercut of the tones and the themes that were presented before.
Well, I would say I think that's fine as long as you make it clear that there's going to be repercussions for going to beat up the president. The Secret Service is there for a reason. If Superman just shows up and is like, "All right, Lex, let's duke it out," and Lex is like, "Yeah, we can fight. You'll probably kick my ass, but I know you won't kill me," and everyone's watching.
Mm-hmm.
And how's Super like? There's going to be some negative press on Superman for that, and you could sort of like do the same thing. You can have a local prominent politician at your big city who is very obviously anti-party, and they're making it difficult for the party to do stuff. And if the party marches down to the castle, swords drawn, well, they're going to be in trouble.
Oh yeah.
So here's kind of my take on that, is that if you have a villain that's set up in a way that makes the party it's hard for the party to touch them through means other than just physical. It's make that kind of the main battle where the party is trying to take them down, make them fall from grace, and then once they achieve that, then the bad guy is like, well, you may have taken my status, but you'll never beat my super suit, and then the party dukes it out. It's like you want to have that fight at the end.
Like once they're backed into a corner, nothing left to lose.
I'd say I think there's still merit in having a social climax to it, though. It's like maybe the party's been fighting them by going out and doing standard adventuring stuff and procuring evidence of their wrongdoing. Like this villain's been scheming and under the table dealings in the background. And I think a fight at the end is certainly super satisfying. But if you were going for like more of a political social game, I think a social encounter to finish off is really good too. Like you'd show up at City Hall and you slam down the evidence of the table and say, I have evidence that proves that King Noggernogle has been engaging in under the table dealings and paying goblins to harass the citizenry. Then the audience gasps as the other courtiers are like, is this true, King Noggernogle? And it's like, no, it's not. And there's a whole scene there that could be really cool, and maybe it ends in a fight. But I think if you could swing that like a cool social encounter to finish that off as well, I think that could be just as satisfying.
Yeah, there's definitely like places for any one of these sort of like climaxes to work all along the scale of physical threat to social threat, and how you resolve that. I think ultimately it probably depends on like your campaign and your players. I think in my current campaign there would certainly be a couple players who'd be disappointed if it wasn't a physical encounter. That's just what I've picked up on and based on what they like in games. That's not a bad thing at all. Like it's D&D. There's a lot of focus on the combat for a reason.
Yeah, I don't play a
it's there to use
barbarian to talk to people in court. That's not.
Yeah, but the fun thing about D&D is like not quite. Maybe it is subverting it. But like you said, Nathan, like a social climax can be interesting, and especially like in a campaign full of combat resolutions, having a big social one would be memorable, certainly. And like, yeah, probably just something to gauge if the party has a really, really cool plan on how to like out the corrupted mayor. Just roll with it. If they seem jazzed about it, go for it.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to imply that it's always got to come to blows, but that
Of course not.
That is a place you can go with it. That would be,
Yeah, it's all like a sliding scale as far as I'm concerned. I think anywhere along it can work.
Yeah, like honestly, anytime I get a question about D&D, I have to fight my first response, which is almost always, well, it depends.
Well, that's true though.
It is.
What is your party like? That's sort of my my instinct. It's sort of same deal.
Yeah, I've said it before, but I've got a way I like to run D&D, but that is not the one way to run it. And if anyone tells you there's only one way to run D&D, they're wrong. As far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
all the rules are just guidelines.
No, there's only one way, and it's my way where I win.
Hell, I've played like back in my 3.5 days when I learned to play. It was basically all munchkinning. That was the way it was, and I didn't know there was any other way. And
can you define munchkinning for me?
Min-maxing, building entirely like not really role playing at all, building an optimal character and going to kill monsters and just get loot and stuff.
Playing it like it's a video game.
Have you played the board game Munchkin?
Yes.
Or the card game?
Yes.
That's
I know of it.
Yeah, it's that sort of that's making fun of D&D, and it plays similarly to that sort of trope of, well, I kick down the door, I kill all the goblins, and I take the treasure. What's the next door?
I was reading a book called Mog World, written by Yahtzee Croshaw. I don't know if you guys ever listened to Zero Punctuation.
Definitely have.
So he wrote a book, and spoilers for the book Mog World. Do you guys care?
No.
Halfway through, it's revealed that so the main character is like the book starts off and he's resurrected from a tomb by an evil necromancer, and it's just him working for this evil necromancer in an army of the undead, and it just plays on a lot of like D&D and fantasy tropes. And halfway through the book, he realizes he's in an RPG, like an MMO RPG, and there's been this reoccurring thing about the afflicted, which are adventurers that slowly get corrupt, and then they just become very like stone-faced and only want gold and money, and it becomes pretty obvious that these are player characters who just storm in and demand money and save people and then run away again.
That's awesome.
It's really funny. Villains.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good point. We were talking
Welcome
about that.
to the book podcast.
So I have kind of this is pretty far in a different direction, but it's something that I feel like is at least worth exploring. How do you guys, or like kind of what's your guys' take on campaigns where the party are the bad guys and the villain is not really a bad guy?
Do you mean like is it a twist that they're the bad guys, or is the premise you guys are an evil campaign?
From the get go, they know they're the bad guys.
I have personally never run a campaign like that. I've got some ideas. I don't. I've heard so many horror stories of people trying to do this, and
yes,
because it's a evil campaign, everyone ends up killing each other in the first 10 minutes because we're all evil. I think what I would do, honestly, is have everyone be underlings or minions of a bigger villain, because, and I feel like this is even a trope in comic books, when the League of Evil shows up, I feel like it's a trope for one of them to fry another one. Like, villains just don't typically get along. They're egotistical and power hungry and maybe a little crazy and murderous.
Just a little
I
murderous.
think, yeah, if you can like have everyone be on the same page from the get-go, as in they're all working for your dark side and they're underlings for him, I feel like that negates a bit of the threat of people all murdering each other right away.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely a bit of a trope in a horror story that your evil party just all turns on each other. But I think that's more of, back to episode 1, communication error. It's miscommunication in people not really, I guess, understanding the evil alignment. When it really gets down to it, we're sitting down to play a collaborative storytelling game, and people should be playing characters that, even if their alignment is evil, can work together to accomplish a singular goal. And maybe the way you solve that is you put them serving one particular villain, and that has a lot of interesting implications. Like, maybe they keep working for him to the end, or maybe they turn on him. But when it comes down to it, if you're in a game where the party turns on each other at the drop of a hat, I don't want to say you're playing D&D wrong, but nobody's going to have fun with that unless it's a one shot. In which case, have at it.
And here's the thing: like, if the party are the villains in the terms of a grander sense, I don't think they're technically the villains, because in terms of story structure, the villain is something, and antagonist is something that opposes the main characters. So just because your party is evil aligned, the villains still have villains, It's just a matter of perspective. So the good aligned party you might throw at them that's going to try to stop them, they're technically the villains simply because they're opposing the party. You know what I mean?
Yeah, protagonist
quite
versus
easily
antagonist.
And it could quite easily be like another villain is their opposition. Maybe it's a political game down in the drow city of Menzoberranzan, and another opposing house is vying for power, and you've got to fight them. They're still evil. You're still evil, but I mean, like you mentioned before, evil characters can't squabble with one another, and this would be an instance to utilize that.
Or you have that instance where it's like, oh yeah, I'm a bad guy, but that guy, he really takes it to another level.
What's the comic that Joker met Red Skull and it's like, I might be crazy, but I'm an American.
Oh my god.
Wait, you were a real Nazi this whole time? Screw you, dude.
Yeah, I think about also like some of the thousands of times Magneto has joined the X-Men to help them out, You can always kind of mix up your alliances, even if temporarily.
Oh yeah, I think my favorite kinds of stories, period, are tragedies and redemptions. And watching a good character turn to darkness is tragic and sad, and it's all the more satisfying when an evil character is finally able to turn away from their evil ways and help the party out.
Redemption arcs can be super fun. Zuko from Avatar, right?
Yes.
A classic.
Or what was the dude from Digimon? The Emperor?
I know, Kenji?
Emperor Mon.
I think it was something like that. But yeah, the Digimon Emperor in like the second season of Digimon had a really good redemption arc too. From being the straight up villain of the series to joining them and helping them.
The point where
a really good one.
Even his Digimon fused with the main characters.
No.
Classic.
No. What were you saying?
I was gonna make a joke. Oh, a really good redemption arc was that Kylo guy. Oh man, that was a great one. Oh,
we don't want to get into this.
Good God.
We'll get canceled.
It's taking every ounce of my willpower to not talk about Star Wars. Anyway, something I don't know if we've touched on quite enough is making your villains hateable if possible. A villain I always think about as being like the most hateable goddamn villain in history is Dolores Umbridge, who I think is clearly like more hateable than Voldemort. And you can debate like which one's more effective, and obviously Voldemort's more powerful in terms of like just power level. But why is Dolores so hateable?
I think. Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say it's so relatable, the level of like hate. It makes it super real because it's like in everyday life we don't often deal with a Dark Lord that's trying to murder us for being born, but we've all met a Dolores.
Yeah.
It's also sort of along the same lines. Voldemort spends a majority of that movie off screen, just sort of doing Dark Lord things. We don't know what he's up to. We just know he's up to something. Whereas Umbridge is like right in their face pretty much the whole movie, messing with them at every opportunity to hinder them and hamper them and just make life miserable for them.
Mm-hmm.
And then she's so smug about it.
I think that's a big part of it. She loves being evil.
She revels in
Well,
it.
and she thinks that she's being good too, like is part of it. Like
Do you think so?
I think in her own mind, what she's doing is for the greater good.
Another character like this, and nobody here's going to get it, is the character of Wynn from Star Trek Deep Space Nine, who's sort of the same type of character. She shows up every few episodes and just starts making life difficult for people on the station, and she does that for 7 whole seasons. And she sort of, I think for me, generates the same amount of hate that Dolores Umbridge does in that one movie, and it's because she's, though not actively opposing the main characters in their primary goal, she's on sort of this more micro level and this more personal level, showing up and saying, "Oh no, you can't do that. The prophets won't allow it. Here, let me rile up the Bajoran people against you."
I think characters like, I can't speak to the Star Trek character because I haven't seen it, but I think characters like this are the perfect example of a social villain because, it's perfectly acceptable for Harry to duel Voldemort, but he can't just fucking cast spells at Umbridge. She's a teacher at a school. She's in a position of power, and there's nothing he can outwardly do apart from, be snarky at her, and then there's immediate repercussions. He gets thrown in detention. And
literally tortured.
Yeah. God, I could talk about Dolores for a long time. She is so evil, and she loves what she's doing. That's definitely an aspect of it, is how Willis, like you said, she's so smug about it.
Yeah. So, well, since we're getting kind of close to the end here, there's something else I wanted to throw at you guys while we're talking about hating and loving villains. There was one villain that I experienced playing Borderlands. It was Handsome Jack, and he was just so great for me because his character was just, I loved his character. He was funny, and he was snarky, and he was like charismatic, but the things that he did to the players made you hate him, and it was just such a like fun villain because it's just like you loved him but you hated him.
Love to hate him. Yeah.
Those charismatic villains, man.
I also think of Hans Gruber from Die Hard, played by the late Alan Rickman. I don't know if you guys have seen it. You must have.
Yeah.
He's charismatic, but then like on the flip of a dime, murders people, and you never really know what he's thinking, but he's a delight to watch. Villains like that, like unpredictable, can be really fun to mess with. I think something I wanted to touch on quickly, because we do got to wrap kind of soon. You've got your perfect like social villains who you can't really touch, but then I have an idea of what your like perfect physically threatening villain could be. And I picture scenes where like the first time you meet them, the villain completely thrashes your party, and then it's sort of an anime trope. The party is so beneath them, it's not even worth killing them, and they just move on. God, I feel like that elicits some real hate. Though there is a fear of getting into the cutscene. Well, maybe. Nathan and Willis, do you guys think it's in poor taste to set up a fight that you 100% plan for the party to lose?
I have a few thoughts on this. I elect not to do this for a couple of reasons. The first one being it kind of sucks as the player. In a story where you are not in the place of the hero, where you're watching this anime character get their shit kicked in, and it's like, oh, that really sucks. I feel bad for them. But if you're if you're invested in this character that you've made, and you lose your agency to this fight that you are unable to win, that kind of sucks. If handled well, I'm sure it can be good, but I personally, as a player, probably wouldn't jive with that a whole lot. And the other reason's the exact opposite. Anytime you present your villain to the party, you need to be cool with the possibility that your party kills your villain. The possibility, it's low, but it is non-zero.
Yeah, this is kind of my take on it. Is you have to be aware of all that stuff, and I think rather than setting it up instead of setting it up for your players to get their shit kicked in, maybe just use it as a backdoor in case your characters get their, collective butts handed to them. And then you say, like, oh, well, it was, they're letting you go now. It's just a way to avoid a TPK, and it will make your players hate them that much more and want to get them in the end.
Yeah, if they happen to lose the first encounter with them, it's a good opportunity for the villain to sneer down their nose and just mutter, "Pathetic," before walking off, all high and mighty. But I think setting up a situation where the villain is going to win is dangerous.
Definitely.
In a couple different ways.
Can you guys think of a better way to set up a physically intimidating villain without crossing blades with the party, so to speak?
Cross blades with the party, people the party know.
Yep, have them kill either a bad guy that they were struggling with super easily, or maybe somebody that they look up to as, a really tough character. They squash them.
Have them march into the party's home base or the city that they are spending most of their time. Kill a ton of people, steal something important, set up a main quest line, and set these characters up as somebody not to be fucked with.
I think you touched on something I was just thinking, Nathan. Show the party the aftermath of this character. Yep. So they walk into the tavern, and every single person has a single crossbow bolt in their heart. It's like, holy shit, what happened here? Not a single bolt was wasted. There's no strays in the walls or anything. One bolt per person. Who the hell did this, or what did this? Or an entire city is sieged, you come into the ruins of a city and we were here a week ago and it was fine. Why is it destroyed now? And the survivors talk about a dragon that came through.
Another way is, this is, of course, stepping on that danger that I mentioned earlier, is you can present your villain to the party, but rather than, kicking their ass and leaving, the villain's there for something else. I think Matt Colville has talked before about his Cavalier the Vile villain, who, in session 1, party's level 1, dude walks into a tavern and basically just demands sacrifices from the innkeeper, who very quickly gives to his demands and gives what he's there for, and he leaves. And you describe the how imposing this villain is and how afraid everyone is, and if the party chooses to get into a direct confrontation, then that's their call.
Yeah,
and if they get their ass handed to them there, I don't, as a DM, necessarily feel as bad, because I gave them warnings up beforehand saying, all right, this guy's really scary. He's got fire in his eyes and darkness hanging around him like a cloak, and you're level 1.
Here's one that I've got, just kind of came to me. Have your villain show up with, maybe 5 or 6 or a number of, bodyguards or generals, or just, his personal guard or minions or whatever. And then the big bad sees the party, and he sends one of his villains, one of his guys to fight the party. And then, if it's, kind of beef it up to be a boss fight. But then, if they struggle with this one guy, they're like, oh my god, this was just one of his guys, and he commands 6 of them.
Yeah, there's just a guy in the back sneering and commanding others.
Yeah, do it sort of like how our Who Would Win does it, where you've got your minor lieutenant villain, present him with measurable feats, and then you make it very clear that his boss is stronger than he is, or
Mhm.
by either actually showing it or implying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think of the Frieza saga from Dragon Ball Z. Like the Ginyu Force worked for Frieza, and the Ginyu Force kicked the shit out of a lot of the main characters, and that's threatening in its own right. But in the back of your mind, you're still thinking the whole time, "Holy shit, they still have Frieza!" And he's clearly stronger than these guys because these guys. Ooh, you know what's really effective about that? These characters that are kicking the shit out of the main characters are scared of this other
Yeah.
character. Like they're visibly afraid. That's such a cool way to set up. Like, oh my god, how strong is this guy then?
Yeah. That's kind of what I was going for with the lieutenant.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are
That's a great example.
a lot of real good ways to sort of set up this physically threatening villain, without potentially getting someone hurt.
Mhm.
Yeah. So, physical villains, social villains, a lot of way to make them personal. I think now we're going to move on to our first question that was sent in by a listener. Hey.
Oh, hell yeah. It wasn't me, I forgot again.
It was definitely not sent in by someone I know personally that I reached out to. Absolutely not. I've never heard of this Petra Mitchell. Never heard of her. Okay. Let's go ahead and listen to her question.
Hi. What are some tips that you can give to DMs, especially DMs who are just starting out, for sort of, I guess you could say, home brewing rules for D&D? Like, let's say you make an entire race or something, or an entire creature that's brand new for the game, but you want to add your own stats and abilities to it. How would you go about doing that and still making sure it's somewhat balanced and not either super weak that gets one-shotted, or the reverse where it one-shots the players?
That's a great question, Petra. Thank you for sending that in. I think first of all, what you want to do is look at real features and abilities that monsters already have in the monster manual. Like, quite literally, just copy it word for word. They're balanced. They're play tested. Don't get too crazy with your first homebrews. Just kind of Frankenstein stuff together.
I would say even go safer than that. For some of my first homebrews, I just took pre-existing entire stat blocks and would either make small modifications to them to suit my purpose, or I would just rename the monster and say this is something else and it looks like this, but it functions identically to this other creature. And if you don't find anything, of course, that works for that, then you have those this variety of stat blocks, like Charles was saying, you can just Frankenstein together.
And I find that one of the biggest things is you got to really think long and hard about whether you really need this homebrew monster or this villain to be homebrew. And if the answer is I want it to be able to do this thing that doesn't exist anywhere in the books, then it takes a lot of balancing to get the books to where they are. So you got to be real careful and think long and hard and maybe even test it out a little bit. And if it comes down to it that the monster is just too powerful for your party, or you're getting halfway through it and it's kicking the party's butt and you haven't even used half its abilities, they don't know what that block is. So you can just tweak things on the fly. And that would, that comes with practice. But the more you do it, the better you get at it.
I'd also like to throw a shout out here to page 274 of the Dungeon Master's Guide, where it does actually have some, not perfect, but rules for doing exactly this, for how to generate a monster with a specific challenge rating using only its basically armor class, hit points, attack bonus, and damage.
Oh, yeah.
So I'd encourage checking that out if you need to start from scratch. But like I said, it's not perfect, and I think for the first homebrews, I think tweaking existing stat blocks is the safest way to go.
Touching on what you said earlier, Nathan, just kind of changing minor things counts as homebrew. Like, I threw a flesh golem against the party that typically flesh golems, when they take lightning damage, they're healed, and if they take fire damage, they have disadvantage on attacks. I had them fight one that was like there was smoke pouring out of it, and fire damage healed it, and cold damage gave it disadvantage. And hey, that's a homebrew monster, straight up. I did other things, but that tweak alone is a homebrew now. And stuff like that's also fun to have veteran play, like throw veteran players through a loop. Is that the term?
Yeah.
Just to sort of keep them on their toes, and so they're not assuming things.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing, because I have been DMing this game since it released, and so a lot of times I'll see a monster and I'll kind of know how to handle it, but it's nice when the dungeon master mixes things up on me and I don't know how to handle it.
Yeah, because that's hard to avoid metagaming if you know a flesh golem's weak to fire, and you're like, but with my character, it gets weird. So just changing stuff up can mess with people. One last thing I want to throw out is pay attention to CR and try to really understand what the CR rating of something means, the challenge rating. There's a very, very handy resource called Kobold Fight Club, which I use all the time, which you can search for so many monsters in 5e and search by different like type of monster and size and CR. If you have an idea of what like CR creature you should be throwing at your party, look at other creatures of that same CR. Get a look for the average health for something of that CR, as well as their stats. So like their strength and dex and all that. And then put something around that same range.
And I was going to say that something else that CR doesn't take into account, but is very important in a fight, is action economy. So you can make a creature that just is, hits unbelievably hard, but has a relatively small health pool. And if the players all roll high on initiative, and they, crush it before it gets a turn, or it misses its one turn to the player's 4, then it doesn't matter really how strong it is if it's getting, not enough turns.
I could probably go on for homebrew and stuff for a long time. Maybe we should do an episode on it.
I was just about to say, I think homebrew is such an interesting topic that we should do a full episode at some point. So I think I've caught ourselves a little short before we go too long. But again, thank you for sending that in, Petra. I
do want to throw out a couple more things just very quick, going off of Willis's comment on action economy. That I don't want to go too much into, but I encourage Matt Colville's video about action-oriented monsters to sort of get the premise of what I would discuss. And also, in reference to Kobold Fight Club, D&D Beyond also has a CR calculator, because I'm afraid of the Wizard's Banhammer. Just wanted to make sure to mention that as well. Anyway, that's all I got now.
Very good. Thanks again, Petra. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think that's about all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for listening in. Don't forget, if you want to send in your own question and hear your own voice in an episode, you can go to our Twitter account. We're the Order of Initiative on Twitter. The link to submit questions is right at the very top of our account pinned there. Next week, we're going to be coming back and talking about designing player backstories and how to help sort of guide your players with that creation. But I think that's it. Thanks for listening, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you. See you then.
Thank you.